Hello, very beautiful community. As I wasn't well enough to do our usual Sunday live today, I thought I'd share a little video giving you a health update. I normally share these on the Vlad's diary channel, so if you want more regular updates about my health, you can just go there. But I wanted to catch up with you today about my health because it's such an important part of how I run my platform, such an important part of how I communicate with you, and also because I get 777 positive good health wishes virtually every day. So I'm very grateful for that. I'm going to give you a little bit of an update about where we are and what kind of impact it's having on the channels. So most of you know that I have had ME, myalgic encephalomyelitis, since about 2003. And that was an extraordinary journey, really for two reasons. One is because, as studies show, ME is one of the most disabling and suffering-inducing illnesses on Earth. Despite the reputation it used to have in the 80s and 90s of being a form of fatigue. And what's important about that is that studies show that the people who are sicker and more suffery than ME patients tend to be people with terminal illnesses who are a few weeks out from death. And I was never very severe with ME. I teetered on severe, but I never quite got there. That's to say, I was 95% bedbound for years. For a while, I lost the ability to talk. I didn't lose the ability to walk in the sense that I've lost it now. More about that in a moment. But obviously, there'll be many days in a week when I couldn't walk. And then I got better, and then I got worse, and then I got better. But better always meant living life on the very best possible day at sort of quarter time or 1/8 time. And worst meant much, much worse than that. And there's always these two things with chronic illness in particular. There is disability and there is suffering. And it's really important to understand that some people are more disabled but suffer less. And some people suffer more but are less disabled. So for instance, you could encounter somebody whose illness makes them confined to the bed 95% of the time, and you could meet somebody whose illness makes them confined to the bed 70% of the time. But the person confined to the 70% bed situation could actually be suffering less. And that's an important difference. When you empathize with chronic illness, folks, always keep the two things in mind. And then keep one more thing in mind. Safe versus unsafe suffering. So safe suffering is suffering where, for instance, you might have extreme joint and muscle pain, but you know that no matter how bad it gets, that's not going to cause anything utterly catastrophic, right? But if you're suffering at the level of neurological symptoms which stop you regulating swallowing or breathing, for instance, that is very, very unsafe. So there's a safety and unsafety distinction here. Okay, enough lecturing. Now, in August 2024, I did a rare trip because I'm pretty sick. So I made a rare trip and I saw a mum of a young woman who died from ME. And on that trip, I happened to have got COVID. And within a month of that, my life changed. I became confined to, let's say, 10-15 minutes of standing time per day. I had on top of the 10-20 ME symptoms, which are all sort of neurological symptoms, pain symptoms, temperature control symptoms, this sort of extraordinary sense of rushing toxins through your body. It feels quite otherworldly. It almost requires infernal imagery to describe the symptoms. It's not like, oh, I've got extreme pain in my head, extreme pain in my legs, and temperature control problems, and fast heart rate. It's nothing like that. It's so much more insidious and violent. So my life changed and probably became 30% of what it was before. And it was already at that point, 15% of what a normal life would be. And I thought, ooh, I'm working on it. I'm in good medical hands. Let's see if I can make any progress. But then, boom, in April, I was hospitalized for a month and I got much worse. My partner feels I nearly died. And at that point, for the first time in my life, I completely lost the ability to stand. And when I say that, I don't mean that, ooh, if I stand, I'll sort of not be able to. I mean, even semi-standing creates extreme crisis for 2 or 3 days. So I haven't stood really for a second properly since April, so kind of 7 months. And I haven't semi-stood for more than a second or two since April. Semi-standing means that you're somewhat leaning on something and then somewhat sitting on something, and it's a semi-verticalized position. You test that. Yesterday I recorded the latest main channel video, which just needs a little edit, or a medium edit on Soviet nostalgia. And what happened was that I just needed to do 2 or 3 minutes of setup for it, which wasn't foreseen by me. And that just required just pulling a light here, pulling a microphone a little bit, shifting a couple of objects in the background from my wheelchair. And that created quite an extreme crisis for about sort of 10 hours, 15 hours. And that was spending 3 or 4 minutes just moving a few objects from my wheelchair and then sitting in the wheelchair to record the video for about 40 minutes. So here is what's new too. I'm looking at a wheelchair and that's very weird to me. It's as weird as not being able to stand. So I'm still completely getting used to it, because no matter how sick I was in the past, I could always stand a bit. So therefore, I think of myself as somebody who could always do it, who could always walk. And I haven't had a proper wheelchair ever until April. I've had a wheelchair, but it wasn't one that was regularly needed, regularly used. So now my limit is 0 on standing, and my wheelchair limit is, well, God knows what. Half an hour a day, an hour a day. So I'm not even wheelchair bound. I wish to be wheelchair bound. I wish that I could be in the wheelchair sustainably. I have a pretty good medical team, which is really a consequence of being extremely proactive and having people in my life who are extremely proactive. So I have 2 cardiologists, including a microvascular cardiologist. I have neurologists, immunologists. I have long COVID specialists, ME specialists. Nearly everybody who is at the top of the field in the UK I have, and I'm also seeing a couple of people in the United States, in Germany. So my medical infrastructure is really all about outstanding doctors who are plugged in, not just to the best clinical experience, but to the latest science. What's happened to me very cartoonishly is that I have microvascular damage from COVID, which I got now, April 2024, well over a year ago. And that's what's preventing me from standing. The trouble is, our science is much more crappy on the small vessels than it is on the big vessels. And so we're doing everything we can, but it's difficult. And as you know, most people with really significant long COVID don't recover. What I would say is that I do feel I have 2 conditions. I don't think that what only happened is that my long COVID has made my ME worse. I feel the microvascular damage as a secondary condition. I'd go even as far as saying that it's not my ME that's preventing me from standing. It's my ME that's making me sick in many, many ways, but it's my long COVID, specifically the microvascular damage, that is preventing me from standing up. What's difficult is that my perfectly well partner 3 years ago herself got COVID and extraordinarily got chronically ill from it, to the point that she had to, she had to go basically off food, be on food substitute. She couldn't tolerate light, couldn't tolerate sound, and there were a few months, maybe a year, where she was more sick than me, which is extraordinary. And I remember that year. That was 3 years ago. And I remember doing some of the chats with you and just being in a completely dazed state because I couldn't believe what was happening. So she is a film director. She is now not able to do what she was doing before, which is making films for PBS, for BBC, and she can't do that anymore. But she reached a point where she could do quite well, much better than me at working from home. She could almost work full time from home. But unfortunately, we got COVID again in late September, and that has left yet another level of residue. And my partner hasn't yet come back to the level that she was at before. So we've got not just my extreme illness, but we've also got a situation where, if you like, my central carer herself needs caring. How am I doing with this emotionally? I think you know. Obviously, it's a blessing and a privilege to hold in a very minimal way that I can all of you who are also going through really huge health and disability issues. And you also, of course, know that I'm holding you as we negotiate difficult political waters, which we meet with anxiety, with uncertainty, with confusion, with rage, with denial. So I have capacity to hold you completely. And you still see that in all the chats. What I don't have a capacity for, from a physical point of view, just swinging back to physical stuff, is to find a way to regularly run the main channel. My genius, super cunning plan is to explore if I can regularly share on the main channel with a much lower level of editing. So we're going to explore that. So I'm still committed from within my current health limits, without anything magical happening, to, share there more, because I think at this time sharing is really, really important, because we're traveling further out from the bay. Back to emotions. What's very interesting is that in the 22 years of having ME until I got long COVID, I was actually almost never, and maybe literally never, sick in my dreams. I was always physically well in my dreams. In the last year, and especially since April, I have always been sick in my dreams, but better than I am in real life. So it shows that there is a bit of pliancy there, that I'm dancing with my new physical circumstances, but that I still haven't processed them sufficiently to contain them properly, right? I still have this psychic permeation whereby things are falling through my hands. I'm not holding this. Part of the reason for this is actually that being ill like this is being busy with a full-time job like a CEO. So you're doing so much stuff to do the medical appointments, to do the strategy about what's the drug regimen, to do the strategy around just how to get through your days and so on, that it takes a little slower to process things. And for instance, I haven't cried a single time I've cried several times since April, probably happy tears when I encountered something beautiful in the world. Human progress makes me cry, not collectively, but when an individual does something remarkable to make themselves more themselves. But I haven't cried because of my grief, because I haven't had the space. And also, of course, what's interesting, you actually need to be quite well to cry. You need to be sufficiently physically relaxed, but if you've got quite a lot of symptoms in the body, you can't. So I'm doing my best to dance with this. As you know, one of the biggest pieces of advice I give to you sick people and to you well people who might get sick someday is that illness is not an external assault on your life. It's part of your life too. It's life giving you something you didn't ask for. It's very difficult to engage with an important question that so many of you are lovingly asking, directly and indirectly. Vlad, how are you compared to before? Are you better? And my response to that is usually just love and gratitude, and to be very thankful for all of your engagement. If you ask the question literally, it's quite hard to answer. I would say that one of the biggest problems I've run into is that I'm intolerant of a lot of the drugs that stand the chance of helping me. So I'm taking them at lower doses than ideally I should. That's a big issue for me. And it's something my doctors are playing around with, but it's a really tough conundrum. And that's very typical for ME patients. And I have a history of that. There's one medication, an immune modulation medication, that helped me the most historically, and I became intolerant to it, which is a kind of a quasi-tragic farce. I think overall, speaking of where I'm at, I have been stronger and more stable in a horizontal position in the last month or two relative to April. But my capacity for verticalization hasn't increased at all. If anything, it's worse than when I was in hospital. Because in hospital, I managed once to stand for about 20 seconds. With big consequences, but I did it. It took me a day to get over it, but I did it. I think also maybe levels of volatility are a bit down. So maybe I'm spending fewer hours in a kind of utter hell. Now don't forget, there's something extremely fake, not in the fake news post-truth sense, but something extremely fake about all of my chats. Namely, that I often wait hours and hours and hours and hours and hours and hours and hours until I can do it, and then I do it, and then boom. And very often it's very deceptive. So I'm often having a much worse day when I don't have the oxygen on during the chat and I'm very animated than other chats when I'm less animated and I have the oxygen on. So what the chats show is what things are like in that top 2% peak of the day, which I have found in which to share with you, but they don't really show the 98%. So you can judge a little from the 2% to the 98%, but it's mostly misleading. So mostly it's not quite an accurate characterization of my day. My day could be a lot worse when the chat looks more sprightly, and my day could be relatively better, even if the chat looks a bit struggling. So what about the future? Well, I don't know, right? It's shark-infested waters, and it's not possible. It's not only possible for me to stay where I am or improve. It's also possible to get worse. I'm very conscious of that. But one of the things I'm most passionate about when it comes to human limitation, human disability, is to accept fixed physical limits. If they are fixed, well, they might not be, you always explore that too. But if there are fixed physical limits, to accept that, but not to go on to then say that the limits of what you can do within these limits are themselves fixed. In other words, my relationship always is, I wonder what I can do It's not, oh my God, I can't do any of these things, and then I can't do any of that, and the only things I can do is this. No, it's always an exploration of what is possible within certain physical limits. It's always a dance. That comes from experience, that comes from excellent mental health, obviously, the capacity to meet with psychic pliancy, the physical rigidity that life has thrown your way in the way you didn't ask for. Okay, there is no particular reason to go on because I could just talk at you for 4 hours about this, but I just wanted to give you a taste of the sort of reality I'm dealing with, and from the sort of reality from which I am, communicating with the culture, much less pompously, talking to you most days on one particular platform. Lots of love. There are no announcements of any kind yet on the channels, but I am thinking to start doing a few things a tiny bit differently. That means absolutely keeping YouTube as the central home, but sharing a bit more and in different ways on different platforms, and also making sure that you and I are connected off this platform, just in case something happens. So, not going to go into that, but I'm saying that just to illustrate the fact that I'm always exploring and proactively reflecting about where we're going together. Tell me how you are if you're struggling in the comments. I mean, struggling in your life, not struggling in the comments. And also tell me how you are if you're doing really well. Leave me a sentence if you're doing really well about what's happened that feels really fantastic, or what's going on that you're very pleased about. And we're going to talk culture, politics, democracy, Russian imperial mania. Soon, beautiful community. Catch you later.